It always starts the same way. You feel that subtle shift in the air, the imperceptible pull behind her gaze as it drifts from who you are toward who she believes you ought to be. You sense it in the half smile that doesn't reach her eyes, in the soft tilt of her head that measures you like a pawn on a chessboard. You think you're special, chosen, worthy of her attention, but what she's truly after is the echo of her own desires, the projection of a yearning she cannot name. And Arthur Schopenhauer, the philosopher of suffering, would lean in to whisper that this is no accident. It is the will in women, that ceaseless striving at the heart of existence, seeking its next object of desire, never to be satisfied. Schopenhauer laid bare the mechanics of human longing. Life is will, the blind, insatiable force that pulses beneath every heartbeat and thought. He argued that satisfaction is an illusion, a fleeting moment of relative calm torn apart the instant you grasp it. Desire, he said, is pain. Fulfillment, merely the brief cessation of agony. And women, like all humans, are governed by this will. But social conventions have taught men to view women as creatures of contentment, embodying grace and completeness. Schopenhauer would correct this misreading. Women are just as captive to the restless will as men, but their ceaseless demands have been masked by a veneer of refinement and expectation. You, as a man, navigate these currents blindfolded. You mistake her pursuit for love, her fickle interest for deep connection. You assume that giving more, your time, your affection, your validation, will still the storm within her. But Schopenhauer's dark truth shreds that hope. There is no end to the will's hunger. With every gift you offer, the appetite regenerates, turning on itself like a serpent devouring its tail. You feel honored when she chooses you, but know this: you are not an object of adoration so much as a temporary salve for the unrelenting ache of desire. And so you find yourself in a perpetual chase, running after an ever-receding horizon. She compliments you one moment, withdraws the next. You ask why, but there is no answer, only the inscrutable logic of the will. Schopenhauer taught that the mind rationalizes what the will demands, weaving stories to justify its compulsions. You'll hear plausible reasons: stress, miscommunication, emotional baggage. Yet these explanations are after-the-fact constructions, not the true engine of her dissatisfaction. The will does not care for explanations, it cares only for itself. Observe how she shifts from one interest to another. Yesterday it was art films, today it is meditation retreats. You marvel at her depth, her versatility, her ever-expanding list of passions, never noticing that each new self is an attempt to fill the void the previous one exposed. Schopenhauer described this as the tragic comedy of human life. No sooner is one desire extinguished than another flares to life, ensuring that satisfaction remains forever out of reach. Women's ever-changing interests are not the sign of versatility, but of the endless oscillation of the will. You might think scholarly arguments can subdue this truth, that intellectual insight can bring peace, but Schopenhauer warned that knowledge of the will is no panacea. It is a mirror reflecting your own shackled condition. Understanding that desire is suffering does not free you from suffering. It only deepens the dread of your predicament. Yet here lies the crux of his bleak remedy. In recognizing the will's tyranny, some rare souls glimpse the possibility of escape through aesthetic contemplation or compassion for others. But for most, including many women, the cycle persists unbroken. In romantic entanglements, this dynamic intensifies. You shower her with gifts, compliments, grand gestures, convinced that each sacrifice draws her closer to contentment, and she responds with warmth, until the warmth cools and you are left bewildered by her indifference. Schopenhauer would observe that such efforts are doomed. The will never settles. You built your hopes on sand, believing that love could satisfy the will's appetite. Instead, you discovered that love itself is another appetite, feeding on your sacrifices until there is nothing left. Consider how social narratives cushion this reality. Society expects women to appear fulfilled, serene, even when their souls are roiling. Complaints of dissatisfaction are labeled as first-world problems, trivial grievances unworthy of sympathy. This cultural dissonance drives women further inward, convincing them that they alone bear the guilt for their own unquenchable thirst. They speak of emptiness in hushed tones, fearing judgment, while the will lurks unacknowledged, whispering that fulfillment lies just around the corner. And men, you absorb these signals and project your own anxieties onto her restlessness. You interpret her dissatisfaction as your failure, rather than the inevitable outworking of the will. Schopenhauer's dark teaching: there is no failure, only the will's endless play. You cannot fix her any more than she can appease the will by outward change. It is a trap of self-betrayal, where you trade your authenticity for a fleeting reprieve, only to find that the next cycle has already begun. Watch how she flirts with novelty, toys, trends, relationships, as if each fresh encounter might still the storm. You may scoff, but understand, novelty is the will's anesthesia, a temporary high that numbs the nervous system before crash looms. Schopenhauer compared this to drugs. The more one indulges, the less effect each dose has, requiring ever more intense experiences. Women's search for the next big thing in life, love, or lifestyle is an echo of this universal law. And yet, there is a bittersweet irony. For those who glimpse the will's mechanisms, a path of liberation faintly appears. Schopenhauer proposed two avenues out of suffering: aesthetic surrender and moral compassion. In moments of pure artistic absorption, the will slackens its grip, allowing you to rest in disinterested observation. Women, often celebrated for their aesthetic sensibility, may experience these moments when immersed in art or nature. But the respite is fleeting. The will inevitably claws its way back. The second path is renunciation, a life of compassion detached from personal desire. Here, individual will wanes in service to universal empathy, but such renunciation demands a rigor few can muster. Schopenhauer saw monastic or ascetic lives as proof that humans can transcend will. Yet he admitted that the majority will never renounce desire so radically. Women, like men, oscillate between fleeting aesthetic reprieves and the pull of personal cravings, caught in the same net of suffering. You find yourself longing for a woman who is satisfied, stable, content. You envision a partner who does not recoil after initial intimacy, who stands firm amid change. But this is an illusion born of ignorance about the will. No human being can sustain that state indefinitely. Schopenhauer's cold wisdom: desire is suffering, satisfaction is temporary, and all life is tinged with pain. To seek permanent contentment in another is to set yourself up for perpetual disappointment. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. So what can you do? Schopenhauer would say, first, recognize the universality of dissatisfaction. See that you are not alone in your unfulfilled hopes. She is not an outlier, but a reflection of human condition. This insight can foster patience and compassion in relationships, as you understand that her restlessness is not a personal slight, but the echo of the will. You stop blaming her and begin to see the shared struggle beneath. Next, cultivate moments of disinterested contemplation together. Share art, music, literature, experiences that invite the will to rest. In those pauses, you glimpse each other's true selves, beyond desire and projection. These interludes strengthen bonds, not by fulfilling desire, but by reminding you that you are more than the sum of cravings. Yet remember, These moments are temporary refuges, not ultimate solutions. Finally, consider compassion as the keystone of connection. When you act from genuine care rather than calculated affection, the will's influence recedes. You become a mirror of her intrinsic worth, not a tool to assuage her cravings. Schopenhauer exalted compassion as the highest virtue because it arises from transcendence of personal will. A compassionate partnership acknowledges the inevitability of dissatisfaction, but chooses solidarity over selfish gratification. Even then, be humble. You will both sway in the winds of desire. Expectations will be dashed, impulses will surge, and cycles of longing and disillusionment will continue. But armed with philosophical awareness, you can navigate these storms without losing yourself or one another. You can accept that perfection is unreachable, yet still conjure fleeting moments of grace in the tempest. And perhaps that is love's radical charge: to embrace imperfection, to stand together in the awareness of suffering, to offer compassion when the will's shadows loom largest. Women will never be satisfied in the absolute sense, nor will men. But together, you can create pockets of respite, temporary islands where the will's roar is muted by understanding, empathy, and shared beauty. And in those moments of shared stillness, you discover that true intimacy isn't born of flawless harmony, but of mutual vulnerability. When you allow yourself to be seen in your cracks, your doubts, your shadows, you invite her to lay down her guard as well. In that exchange of raw honesty, the will's fierce demands soften, if only for a breath, and you glimpse each other's hearts unclothed by pretense. Here, imperfection becomes the very doorway to connection. To stand together in the awareness of suffering is to acknowledge that your separate journeys of longing have converged into a joint odyssey. Your restlessness ceases to feel like competition and transforms into a shared quest for understanding. You listen not to reply, but to bear witness to her unspoken ache, and she mirrors that same compassion back to you. In this reciprocal gaze, you forge an alliance that transcends the push and pull of desire. Over time, you begin to weave small rituals: morning coffees sipped in silence, late-night letters read by lamplight, walks through rain-soaked streets, each an act of resistance against the will's insatiable craving for change. These rituals are not cures, but oases, crafting rhythms of presence that remind you why you chose one another amid life's swirling currents. They become the fragile scaffolding that holds you steady when the noise of wanting grows deafening. And when conflicts rise, because they inevitably do, you learn to meet not as adversaries, but as companions. You practice pausing before reacting, letting empathy rise in the gap between her words and your impulse. You replace defensiveness with curiosity. Tell me more about what that feels like. In those pauses, the will loses its grip and compassion finds its voice. So stop seeking constant reassurance. Stop believing that the next gift, the next trip, the next career milestone will finally fill the void. Recognize the dark truth Schopenhauer unveiled. The will is the root of all striving, the source of all suffering, the engine of endless dissatisfaction. Then, in that revelation, choose compassion over consumption, connection over conquest, presence over performance. Because if you can hold that tension, if you can love her while knowing she is restless, if you can be loved while knowing you are flawed, then you are no longer slaves to the will. You become its gentle masters, weaving meaning not from relentless pursuit, but from moments of stillness, empathy, and shared humanity. And in those precious instants, you discover that though women and men are never satisfied in the grand scheme, they can be deeply content in the fragile, luminous present you build together.